Sometimes it feels like the whole world of finance, especially how money works. It's almost like it's meant to be confusing, right? As if it's this secret language only certain experts really get.
Yeah, leaving most people feeling a bit lost.
Exactly. Well, what if there was a kind of shortcut, a way to cut through the jargon and get a really clear picture of what's actually shaping our economy?
That's what we're aiming for today.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating and, yeah, often misunderstood world of money. We'll look at its history and how this relatively new digital thing is shaking up centuries of established thinking.
And our guide for this deep dive is a really provocative book, The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. It's not just another dry economics text,
No, not at all.
It's a pretty radical reevaluation. It challenges a lot of assumptions about what money even is, how it works, and, well, it sets the stage for understanding something truly disruptive.
Right. So our mission for you listening is to unpack the core arguments, the surprising facts from this book. We want to give you a clear sense of why Bitcoin might be more than just some passing tech fad.
And what it could mean, not just for finance, but for society.
Exactly, for your financial future and maybe even for society as a whole. Okay, let's unpack this. So where does the book start?
Well, it kind of comes out swinging, doesn't it? It talks about modern times seeing this, quote, complete riot against some class of experts, especially macroeconomists.
Yeah, it doesn't pull any punches. It even claims that former Fed bosses like Greenspan and Bernanke had, and this is direct quote, little grasp of empirical reality.
Wow. That's a strong statement. It's not just criticizing people, it's really questioning the whole system of managing money we've had for decades.
It is definitely provocative, and look, many mainstream economists would absolutely disagree.
Yeah.
But the book uses this to highlight what it sees as a fundamental problem, the danger of central banks operating in this kind of perfect monoculture, a monoculture, meaning everyone thinking the same way.
Pretty much. It draws heavily on F.A. Hayek's ideas here, the Nobel laureate, his concept of distributed knowledge.
Right, the idea that no single person, no central committee can possibly know everything needed to run an economy effectively. That knowledge is spread out, dispersed.
Exactly. And the book takes that further, suggesting that, and this sounds counterintuitive, zero intelligence crowds under the right design can actually outperform Soviet-style management composed of maximally intelligent humans.
Okay, hold on. Zero intelligence crowds. That sounds harsh.
Well, it doesn't mean people are stupid. It means that individual decentralized decisions, when aggregated within a good system, like a free market, often lead to better outcomes than even the smartest central planners trying to control everything from the top down.
So it's about harnessing collective wisdom, not relying on a few experts to dictate monetary policy. Which brings us, I guess, to the core distinction the book makes. Sound money versus easy money.
Yes, this is absolutely central to the argument.
And this easy money trap. It's defined by this crucial ratio, right? The existing stock versus the new flow.
Precisely. How much of something exists compared to how easily you can make more of it? If it's easy to create new units, the flow is high relative to the stock, you're potentially in that trap.
Okay, so give us some examples. How does this play out?
Well, the book uses some really vivid historical examples. Think about seashells. Used as money in some places, right?
Right.
But then technology improves. It becomes easier to find and, mass-produce seashells. The flow skyrockets, the stock-to-flow ratio collapses, and bam, their value as money is destroyed.
Okay, that makes sense. Easy to make more, loses its monetary value.
Or a more modern example, maybe the Hunt brothers in the late 70s. They lost $1 billion trying to corner the silver market, trying to basically force its remonetization.
Why did they fail?
Because no matter how much silver they bought up, miners and others could always bring more to the market. They could increase the flow in response to the price increase. Silver just wasn't scarce enough. Its stock to flow wasn't high enough.
Unlike gold.
Exactly. Gold's chemical properties make it incredibly difficult and costly to extract from the earth. So its new supply, the flow, is always tiny compared to the massive existing stock accumulated over millennia. That gives it a consistently high stock-to-flow ratio, making it much harder money.
So the temptation, if you can create more money easily, someone probably will.
That's the book's point, and it argues this inevitably destroys wealth for anyone trying to save in that medium.
But it's fascinating. The book points out that even gold, the classic example of sound money, had what it calls a tragic flaw, and that was its centralization.
Yes. Gold itself is scarce, but how we used it required centralization. People stored it in banks, central banks held national reserves,
Which created an opportunity.
an opportunity for governments eventually to issue more paper claims to gold than they actually held in their vaults, essentially creating money out of thin air, backed by only a fraction of gold.
Which devalued the money everyone else held.
Right. It effectively transferred value, the book argues, from the actual money holders to the governments and banks, like a hidden tax. So even gold, the ultimate sound money, wasn't immune to this problem of centralized control.
Okay, so if even gold wasn't perfect because of centralization, was a truly incorruptible money even possible? That seems to be the question Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever they were, set out to answer.
Exactly. And this is where, as you said, it gets really interesting.
November 1st, 2008, an email hits a cryptography mailing list. Satoshi Nakamoto announces, what was it? A new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer.
With no trusted third party. That last part was the bombshell.
No trusted third party. I
Yeah.
mean, that flew in the face of centuries of how money worked, right? Always needing banks, governments, some central authority.
Absolutely. It was a radical departure. And the genius of Bitcoin's design, according to the book, is how it embodies that Hayekian idea we talked about earlier.
Distributed knowledge.
Yes. Bitcoin has no owner, no authority that can decide on its fate. It is owned by the crowd, its users. It's Hayek's distributed knowledge applied to money itself.
So unlike gold, which needed those centralized custodians, those banks that governments could eventually control,
Bitcoin is the network. Control is radically decentralized. It's truly permissionless in a way gold, in practice, never could be.
the book uses this amazing analogy to explain it. The Yab Island Rise Stones.
Oh yeah, the rhinestones. Huge, heavy limestone discs, some weighing tons, basically impossible to move easily.
So how did they work as money if you couldn't move them?
Ownership was transferred simply by public announcement. Everyone on the island knew who owned which part of which stone. The ownership record was held collectively in the minds of the community.
So you couldn't steal it because everyone knew it wasn't yours. The social consensus was the ledger.
Precisely. And the book draws a direct parallel to Bitcoin's shared ledger, the blockchain. Transactions happen, and the money does not actually move physically.
Instead, the record of ownership changes.
And that change is verified and agreed upon by the entire distributed network of users. It's a global digital version of that YAPES consensus.
Which allows for something entirely new. Digital scarcity. And not just scarcity, but absolute scarcity.
Yes, that fixed supply of 21 million coins, that's the key. No physical commodity that was also divisible and easily transferable had ever achieved that before. Gold is scarce, but we don't know the absolute total amount or how much future mining might yield. Bitcoin's supply is fixed and known.
Which leads to maybe the book's boldest claim: Bitcoin is the hardest money ever invented.
It's a strong claim based on that difficulty adjustment mechanism.
Explain that again. If Bitcoin's price goes way up,
Normally, for something like gold, a higher price incentivizes more mining, increasing the supply, which can then dampen the price. Classic market feedback.
but with Bitcoin,
A higher price attracts more miners? Yes, but the network protocol automatically makes it harder to mine new coins. The difficulty adjusts upwards.
so rising value doesn't lead to increased supply flow.
Exactly. It just makes the network more secure by attracting more computing power to validate transactions. The supply schedule remains fixed, predictable, aiming for that 21 million cap. That predictable, inelastic supply is what makes it hard money in the book's definition.
And the early days showed this taking hold, didn't they? The price went from fractions of a cent.
Yeah, from middle near 0.00994 in October 2009, its first recorded market price, to over $4,000 by October 2017. And transactions grew from maybe 90 a day to over 284,000 daily in that same period.
And the book even projected its stock-to-flow ratio would surpass gold's.
It projected it would overtake gold by 2022 and essentially double it by 2025, really cementing its status, algorithmically at least, as the hardest form of money. It reflected this growing recognition of its unique, decentralized, scarce nature.
Okay, so we've covered the mechanics, the history, but the book goes deeper into the societal impact, this idea of time preference. What is that exactly?
Time preference is basically how much you value the present compared to the future. Do you prefer satisfaction now, or are you willing to delay gratification for a potentially larger reward later?
And how does the type of money we use affect that? Seems like a bit of a leap.
Well, the argument is that sound money, money that holds its value or even appreciates over time, encourages a lower time preference.
Meaning you're more willing to wait. to think long-term.
Exactly. You're more inclined to save, to invest, to accumulate capital because you trust your savings will maintain their purchasing power. The book argues this is absolutely fundamental, the key to capital accumulation and the advance of human civilization.
Okay, so conversely, easy money or unsound money.
Money that constantly loses value due to inflation. It encourages a higher time preference. Why save for 10 years if your money will be worth significantly less then?
The incentive is to spend it now, consume immediately.
Right. Instant gratification. And the book controversially suggests this can even contribute to broader societal issues, what it calls moral failings, stemming from this short-term focus.
That's a really profound claim. Connecting monetary policy to morality and long-term thinking. And it ties us into innovation too, right?
Yes, it makes this fascinating, though, again, debatable historical argument. It looks at the pre-1914 era, the sort of heyday of the classical gold standard.
The golden era.
And it points to what it calls 0 to 1 inventions during that time, things that were fundamentally new.
Like electricity, cars, the telegraph, modern medicine,
Yeah.
things that created entirely new categories.
Exactly, world-changing breakthroughs. Then it contrasts this with the post-1914 era, the era of government-controlled, often inflationary money.
And the argument is that innovation shifted.
It argues innovation shifted more towards one-to-many improvements, scaling existing technologies, making things faster, cheaper, more efficient, which is valuable, of course, but perhaps fewer truly fundamental category-creating breakthroughs.
So the implication is that the type of money might actually influence the kind of innovation a society pursues. That's a wild thought.
It's definitely a challenging perspective, and it extends this even to the art. It suggests the great flourishing of Renaissance art, say in Florence or Venice, was financed by patrons holding sound money gold florins, ducats, who had a very low time preference.
They could afford to wait years, even decades, for a masterpiece, knowing their wealth was secure.
Right. Patience was economically rational. The book contrasts this quite sharply with its view of much modern art, which it critiques as often being produced quickly under the influence of unsound money, perhaps prioritizing immediate impact or shock value over enduring artistic merit.
Wow. Okay, so sound money potentially fosters long-term thinking and savings, innovation, even art. What about economic stability?
The book strongly links unsound money to instability, especially unemployment. It cites Hayek again, arguing that the cause of boom and bust cycles and unemployment isn't inherent to capitalism.
No, rather.
Governments denying enterprise the right to produce good money. Basically, manipulating the money supply introduces distortions that lead to misallocation of resources and eventual downturns.
Is there an example of that?
It uses Switzerland. It points out Switzerland had near zero unemployment for decades, while its franc was rigidly pegged to gold. After it abandoned the gold peg and joined the IMF in 1992, adopting a more flexible fiat system, unemployment rose. Now, correlation isn't causation, obviously. Many factors are at play.
Sure, but it's presented as evidence supporting the idea that sound money leads to more stable economies.
Correct. And tied to that is the problem of monetary nationalism.
What's that?
When each country has its own government-controlled fiat currency, it inevitably leads to nations trying to manipulate their exchange rates, often by devaluing their currency to make exports cheaper.
These currency wars we sometimes hear about.
Exactly. The book argues it's a fundamentally flawed beggar-thy-neighbor strategy. While it might offer a temporary export boost, it ultimately impoverishes the citizens of that country by eroding their savings and purchasing power. It becomes a race to the bottom.
So after laying out all these problems with centralized government-controlled money, Bitcoin is positioned as what? A solution.
As a simple technological fix, is how the book puts it. A fix to this modern pestilence of government surviving by exploiting the productive individuals who happen to live on their soil. It's strong language.
Very strong. And it emphasizes that Bitcoin achieved monetary status differently.
Completely differently. Not by government decree, not by legal tender laws, but purely due to its reliable salability. People started using it and valuing it organically because it worked as a scarce, transferable, verifiable asset, despite having no authority mandating its use.
So looking forward, what does the book see as Bitcoin's main roles? Where does it fit in?
Primarily two things. First, as a reliable long-term store of value. Think of it as a digital gold, but potentially superior because of its absolute scarcity and ease of transfer and verification.
Okay, a store of value. What's the second role?
As a sovereign form of money that allows individuals to conduct permissionless transactions, meaning you can send value anywhere in the world without needing approval from a bank or government. Uncensorable economic activity.
But what about the common criticism? Transaction speed and volume. Bitcoin can't handle millions of transactions per second, like Visa, right?
Right, and the book addresses this directly. It argues Bitcoin is scaling differently. It's scaling through an increase in the value of on-chain transactions, not through a rise of their number.
Meaning the main blockchain is settling fewer, but larger, more significant transfers.
Exactly. While smaller, everyday payments can happen on second layers, like the Lightning Network, or even off-chain entirely on exchanges, which then settle periodically in larger batches on the main chain.
Kind of like how banks net out transactions internally before settling with the central bank.
Somewhat analogous, yes. The book even mentions Hal Finney, one of the earliest Bitcoin pioneers, who back in 2010 envisioned Bitcoin-backed banks acting as this secondary payment system.
Okay, that makes sense for scaling.
Okay.
But here's a really interesting, almost paradoxical thought the book raises.
Yeah.
What if central banks start buying Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a mind-bending idea, isn't it? Central banks, the issuers of fiat currency, holding Bitcoin as a reserve asset.
Why would they even consider that? Maybe as, like, insurance. The book says insurance against the scenario of it succeeding.
That's one potential driver. If Bitcoin continues to grow and potentially challenges fiat currencies or even gold as a reserve asset, central banks might feel compelled to hold some, just in case. It could trigger a kind of reverse bank run.
A reverse bank run? What does that mean?
Instead of people rushing to pull money out of banks, central banks might rush into Bitcoin. Driven by its unique properties, it's impervious to third-party security holes, it's nobody else's liability. If one major central bank starts buying, others might fear being left behind if its value continues to rise relative to their existing reserves.
Wow, a global game of monetary musical chairs, potentially.
It's a speculative scenario, of course, but it highlights the profound questions Bitcoin raises about the future nature of reserve assets.
So wrapping it up, the book's final assertion is pretty powerful. It says Bitcoin offers global payments and final settlement cheaply for anyone and replaces
human-directed monetary policy with superior and perfectly predictable algorithms. It's arguing for the predictability and incorruptibility of code over the discretion and potential fallibility of human central bankers.
So what does all this mean for you listening right now? It means gaining a new framework, a new lens, to understand a technology that could fundamentally reshape money as we know it. We've taken quite the journey today, a deep dive into the Bitcoin standard. We've explored how Bitcoin, with its fixed supply, its decentralized nature, really offers a potentially new paradigm for money.
Yeah, challenging centuries of centralized control, hinting at maybe a future where sound money could foster individual freedom and maybe even broader societal flourishing again.
It's a complex debate, and certainly not over.
Not by a long shot. But understanding the history of money, the arguments about sound versus easy money, and the unique properties of something like Bitcoin, it gives you a critical lens, doesn't it? To view the economic world and maybe your own financial decisions with newfound clarity.
It really underscores that the kind of money we use isn't just an economic detail.
No, it's a profound social and political choice with ripples affecting everything from innovation to art to individual liberty.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Thought podcast.